Mais uma vez eu cumprimento a todas as pessoas aqui presentes e vamos dar prosseguimento ao colóquio Cícero e a Religião Romana, desta vez com a conferência do Dr. Federico Santangelo, da Newcastle University, com quem eu tenho a grande alegria de trabalhar neste momento e ainda num projeto que durará ainda mais 2 anos, um projeto da British Academy, que me dá, enfim, muita alegria, inclusive pela oportunidade de ter vocês aqui, de ter todas essas estrelas, nossas bibliografias aqui presentes, né? Eu vou passar a palavra, então, para o Dr. Federico Santangelo. Sua obra mais conhecida aqui no Brasil é um livro sobre Sulla e as elites e o Império, publicado em 2007, e o Divination, Prediction and the End of Roman Republic, publicado em 2013. Tá? Recentemente, um artigo em português do Dr. Federico Santangelo foi publicado na revista Elad, né, em português, uma tradução. E Federico hoje vai apresentar a conferência Cicero on Divine and Human Foresight, Cicero sobre a previsão divina e humana. E mais uma vez te agradeço.
Obrigado, Cláudia. There should be a handout, which I think has made the rounds, so I hope that at least most of you have it. It's, I suppose, by now fairly uncontroversial that Cicero has a central place in any attempt to write the history of Roman religion in the late Republican period. No serious student of the late Republic embraces the view that he is a hypocrite or that he has a dissociated and inconsistent position on religious matters. The view that he was a skeptic in private who makes public statements of allegiance to traditional religion that actually contradict his own personal views. It was a widely held view, which I think is no longer accepted by anyone who's doing serious work on this period. The more recent prejudice, whereby Cicero's philosophical work should be disregarded by the historian of Roman religion because it is uninformative on matters of ritual, has also been overcome by a growing body of work over the last decade or so. There is a great deal of information on the workings of public religion that can be drawn from Cicero's treatises, and that is even more emphatically the case if we turn to some of his political speeches. While it is clear that Cicero's assessment of religious problems marks a viewpoint, betrays a viewpoint that is very much that of a sort of high end of the spectrum of the cultural debate of his own time, it is also apparent that his views are those of a very informed and involved witness of Roman religion. And I suppose Valentina's paper has gone some way towards further proving this point. His role, Cicero's role in the process that has been defined with a fair degree of approximation as a process of rationalization and change in late Republican culture, has been duly brought out. And it is clear that the viewpoint of Cicero on Roman religious practice and change is a partial one. After Andreas Bendelin's sketch of the market model for Roman religion, hardly any vision of Roman religion can claim a central place, but a whole range of options can claim their rightful place in a diverse field of competition and interaction. Item number 1 of your handout. Notably, some recent work has shed welcome light on Cicero's reflection on the problem of the divide and confrontations between human and divine status. Spencer Cole has devoted an important monograph on Cicero's contribution to a major shift in Roman political and intellectual life, which is enabled by the formation of a novel symbolic vocabulary. A central role in the unfolding of this process is the speech that Cicero gave in favor of the bestowal of a command in the East upon Pompey the Great, a speech he gave in 66 BC, where the talents and ability of Pompey are described in highly creative and innovative terms. Pompey's leadership is constructed as a quality that has both human and divine attributes. As Cole felicitously puts it, there is an improvisational quality, quote, to the way in which Cicero constructs his account of the talents of the commander. Cicero is busy devising a new language, and he's during experimenting with its potential in a careful balance between innovation and continuity, between the creative engagement with the Hellenistic tradition of panegyric and the attempt to present the merit of Pompey in a way that is congenial to the celebration of military valor that belongs in a more traditional Roman political discourse. The argument Cicero deploys is as sophisticated as it is differentiated. He presents his praise of Pompey by shifting tones in a highly creative fashion. Each aspect of his argument must be understood in function of the others, and great attention should be paid to the tone with which praise of Pompey is bestowed and qualified at the same time. The methodological point made by Cole is worth applying more broadly to the body of work of Cicero, and is especially useful to the exploration of the problem that I shall try to discuss in this context, the problem of divine and human foresight in Cicero's thought. The semantic field of foresight and prediction in Latin is chiefly conveyed by the verb providere, which could roughly be translated as to foresee or to see ahead. And it is also conveyed by the nouns that are derived from providere, notably providentia and prudentia, and the related adjective, prudence. Needless to say, the language of foresight in Latin is not exclusively conveyed by those terms and must be charted across a broader range of usages. However, applying the technique of Wortstudien, word studies, to the De Imperio Cnae Pompei can yield valuable results. So let's take the providere and sort of its cognate terms as a vantage point. The verb providere occurs twice in the speech, and both instances are very politically loaded. The first one in chapter 20 is about an invitation to the audience, it's a speech to the people, to take the conflict in the East seriously and to avoid the trap of overlooking what ought to receive very strong attention. Ne forte ea vobis quae diligentissime providenda sunt contemplenda esse videantur. Providere is here deployed in the sense of attending to, of taking due steps towards, which is coterminous with the domain of predicting, but is first and foremost rooted in actual political practice, very much in the here and now. The burden of doing so, of providere in a competent way, is on the people. Cicero takes upon himself the task of steering his audience appropriately. The second occurrence is at a crucial stage of Cicero's construction of Pompey's excellence, and notably of his virtus. He lists all the virtutes imperatoriae and claims that Pompey has them all to a greater extent than any other Roman commander. The list is closed by consilium in providendo, which may roughly be translated, I suppose, as wisdom in foreseeing. It's not far-fetched to regard the list as being arranged in an ascending pattern, opened by labor in negotis and culminating with a quality of foresight towards the end, at the end. At any rate, the reference to consilium opens up a key thematic front in the speech, more broadly, which is further developed in a number of further instances. Pompey's consilium has already been thematized as a force of unrivaled might earlier on in the speech. Cicero has spoken of the divinium consilium and singularis virtus that have enabled Pompey to overcome the threat presented by Sertorius in Spain during the 70s. A war that may be regarded as a prequel of sorts to the Mithridatic campaign, since the leader of the Roman breakaway state in the Iberian Peninsula had been in talks with the king of Pontus, and the prospect of an alliance between the two enemies of Rome, or indeed of the Roman central government, had been a realistic and frightening scenario. The judgment that Pompey has shown on that occasion is crucially qualified by an adjective that closely relates him to the gods without quite equating him to them, divinum. Since consilium is related to the domain of foresight, in Pompey's case we have a pointer to the affinity with the foresight, the clairvoyance of the gods. Concilium is a quality into which other commanders partake. Lucullus, Gnaeus Lentulus, Cicero himself can make a fair claim to it. Chapters 20, 68, 69 of the De Imperio. But only Pompey can make a claim to Divinum Concilium. And only Pompey's Concilium can bring a solution to a war that appears to have been brought about by a Divinum Concilium of sorts in turn, whose ultimate aim may be regarded to bring an end, to an end, the other wars that Rome is involved with, a point that's made at chapter 42. Pompey shares the same quality of concilium with the gods. So is suggested by Cicero. The divine ability of Pompey to attend to the matters of the state takes the discussion in two directions. It looks, so to speak, both forwards and backwards. On the one hand, it points towards a scenario in which the tendency to speak of the divine merits of a political figure becomes an increasingly prominent and effective way of stressing their significance in a context of harsh political competition. It points towards a scenario in which Caesar will assert his own divine status later on in the 40s, and in which the imperial cult will eventually emerge as a structural feature of the political context in Rome and across the empire. I'm speaking of Roman imperial cults in the singular just because that is the established scholarly tendency. One could very helpfully speak of Roman imperial cult in the plural, but that's another paper. On the other hand, it goes back to a tradition that is well rooted in Greek thought and has in turn a strong development in Rome, notably through the work of Cicero himself, the problem of divine foresight, the philosophical problem of divine foresight. The matter had been discussed, of course, by both Plato and Aristotle, and Cicero knew that very well indeed. The Timaeus, a work that was translated into Latin by Cicero, speaks of a divine pronoia through which the world is governed as a living and intelligent being. The well-known story of the swan song in the Phaedon is a reflection on the ability to recognize well in advance the rewards of death, which is conferred upon the swans by Apollo, an ability that Plato defines in terms of mantike, a Greek term that in the mid-1st centuries BC is translated into Latin as divinatio. Plato also uses the verb proeidein, which of course closely mirrors providere, right? The parable of the swans is indeed taken up in sympathetic terms, closely mirroring the Greek text in the Tusculanae, where Cicero speaks in terms of divinatio and providere. And the problem is further developed elsewhere in the first book of the same work. A few chapters above, Cicero gives an extended quotation from his Lost Consolatio, in which he puts forward a summary of the Aristotelian view of the problem. All mental abilities do not have their origin on earth, but derive from the gods. Any form of mental power is of divine origin, be it that memory, thought, or reflection. And these three modes of thinking are the ability to recall the past, provide for the future, and effectively, dealing with the present and its challenges. So in this vision, human foresight is directly inspired by divine foresight. It would be hasty to regard, to hold the view that Cicero is uncritically accepting these philosophical theories, or indeed that he's contradicting himself within the framework of his work by alternatively embracing contradictory philosophical paradigms. But these references to the areas of contact between divine providence and human foresight are a stronger pointer to Cicero's familiarity with the rich and diverse philosophical tradition in which these issues had been extensively discussed. These matters always have a broad political significance, but are less directly preoccupied with current political developments than is the case with Cicero's engagement with the problem in the De Imperio Gnae Pompei. Cicero has read and reflected widely on the problem of prediction. In the second book of the De Natura Deorum, he gives space to the Stoic theory of divine providence, which regards the world as an entity driven by an intelligent design. And in this case, Balbus cautions against the misconception of providentia as a single divine entity, something conferred by a single divine entity, but he regards it as something that stems from the wider congregation of the gods. Even in this highly abstract mode of thinking, however, the pull of the political implications of the metaphor turns out to be especially strong, if anything, for its explanatory power. When one speaks of providentia, the word deorum, of the gods, is always implied, just as one always means of the Areopagos when speaking of the government of the community of the Athenians. When in speaking of the government of the community of the Athenians, one says that it is ruled by the council, Atheniensium Republicam Consilium Regi. The analogy between the council of the gods and the ancient, distinguished body that plays a central role in the government of Athens remains a productive one, and it is worth noting in passing that the words providentia and consilium are again juxtaposed here, as they were in the De Imperio, although the word consilium is here used in a concrete meaning to refer to the notion of assembly rather than that of intelligence and wisdom. The importance of this dossier in Cicero's work, has recently been brought out in a robust overview by Luciano Traversa, who has produced a valuable study of the instances of the terms that pertain to the semantic fields of foresight and risk in Cicero. The two terms around which Traversa has framed his discussion are providentia and temeritas. He has also rightly stressed the significance and richness of the semantic field of caution, revolving around the word cautio. Providentia, however, plays an arguably less central role in this debate than Traversa envisages. What is central to the debate on the prediction of the future is the broader notion of providere, from which a set of nominal and adjectival forms, of course, derive. And the related verb prospicere also plays a significant role in the same connection. A survey of the instances in which Cicero discusses the remit and potential of foresight can prove especially useful. There are a number of references to the ability to foretell the future in Cicero's work, but there are more specifically some definitions of foresight at various moments of his work. Again, a fine balance should be struck between the need to chart the development of Cicero's thought on the matter and the need to seek consistency or indeed identify contradictions, which are largely determined by differences in approach and tone. The earliest attempt to define foresight in Cicero's work, the earliest surviving attempt, may be found in his early rhetorical treatise, the De Inventione, probably written between 91 and 88 BC, frighteningly young age, and certainly dating indeed to the very early stages of Cicero's intellectual work. In the second book, he confronts the problem of how to define what is honorable, honestum. One of the components of honestum is virtus, and virtus is in turn divided into four parts, the first one of which is prudentia. The whole discussion is framed around a diaretic mode. Definitions are chiefly achieved through careful attempts to divide up complex problems into simpler ones, which may in turn be liable to be divided up into further units. Prudentia, indeed, is in turn composed of memory, intelligence, and providentia, providence. And as we have seen above, a similar distinction between the mastery of the past, of the present, of the future is stressed elsewhere in Cicero's work. In the De Inventione, however, there is a striking terminological twist. Providentia is defined as a component of prudentia. Strictly speaking, of course, the two terms are morphologically identical. They both derive from providere. The word prudentia is a contraction of providentia. There is, however, a more specific distinction between these two concepts. While providentia is explicitly focused on the knowledge of the future, prudentia, in this definition, has no ostensible ties with that dimension, but is a form of knowledge that encompasses three levels of time. As has long been recognized, its remit can be closely associated with the Greek philosophical notions of phronesis or sophia. It is, in other words, a notion that is best understood as wisdom than as foresight, although it does encompass a foreknowledge of the future. And a largely similar definition of prudentia is put forward in a much later work, the Partitiones Oratoriae, dating to 54 BC, where this quality is regarded as coterminous with caliditas, shrewdness, or indeed as a form of sapientia. They all derive, all these qualities, sapientia, caliditas, prudentia, from scientia, a higher form of knowledge. A distinction is drawn between the prudentia to be deployed in domestic contexts and the prudentia that is used in the political arena, the prudentia civilis. And I just note in passing that the expression prudentia civilis has a very rich and complex reception in, early modern and modern political thought throughout the 1500s and 1600s and so on in Europe. Cicero came back to the problem in other works, works in which his engagement with the issue is arguably less derivative from Greek traditions and in which the balance between prudentia and providentia is codified, at any rate in very different forms. In the Hortensius, a lost work, lost to us, written in 45 BC, he touched upon the problem in a context that eludes us, given the fragmentary nature of the work. In fragment 96, providere comes across as a prerogative of the wise man, the sapiens, and wisdom is hence known as a form of prudentia. At the beginning of the 6th book of the De Republica, written in the mid-50s, again in a fragmentary context, the discussion is shifted from the role of the sapiens to that of the ruler, the rector. The name itself of that quality derives from providere, ex providendo. The etymology is fully spelled out. And in this second case, there is no identification between sapientia and prudentia, but of course the political implications of prudentia are strongly stressed. And more importantly, the definition, as you can see, is framed around rather different lines to those envisaged in the De Inventione. The etymological link with providere aligns prudentia very strongly with the engagement with the future and with the need to attend to it. One can lay a claim to prudentia insofar as they're able to see ahead, to use and display foresight. The problem is further explored elsewhere in the De Republica. In the 2nd book of the dialogue, there is a discussion of Romulus's contribution to the development of augury, a topic that, as Valentina showed us, is clearly very close to Cicero's heart for a number of reasons. Augury is, of course, inextricably linked with the foundation of the city and with Romulus' choice of a site for the new community. In his assessment of the choices made by the founder of Rome, Cicero resorts to the semantic field of providere with striking consistency. The choice of a site for the foundation must be most carefully weighed up, diligentissime providendum, by whoever takes up the task of setting up the new community. Romulus showed great ability to think ahead, excellenti providentia, in not installing the new city on the coast, but further inland, so that it would be further protected from external attacks. A few chapters below, 212, Romulus is further praised for the foresight he showed in ordering the rape of the Sabine women, which would eventually serve the stability and expansion of the city in the longer term. The reference to Romulus's providentia is strongly focused on a decision that is based on his ability to anticipate the future and to shape decisions accordingly. Rather than being about the quality of foresight in general, it is a word that captures the act of seeing ahead in the moment. And the same approach is mirrored in what I think is the only other reference to providentia that Cicero makes in his surviving work, occurring, and it's a reference that occurs in a political speech. In the 3rd Catilinarian, he relates to the people the recognition that he has just received from the Senate for his work against the conspirators, against Catiline and his followers, and he records the thanks he received for freeing the city from the greatest threat presented by Catiline. Virtute consilio providentia mea, Catilinarian 3.14. Again, providentia is associated with consilium, and it seems to capture the meaning of foresight in action, of the act of foreseeing a danger before others, rather than the abstract general notion of prudentia. Another reading, however, may well be possible. In the context of a political speech, especially one addressed to the people, the reference to providentia is marginally more intelligible than prudentia and makes the etymological roots and implications of the terms more transparent. As I said, this is the only other reference to providentia in Cicero's political writings, but of course reflections on providere and related terms are further developed in other later works. In the first book of the De Legibus, Marcus, the character of Cicero, of course has an important part in that dialogue, offers a working definition of prudentia that further develops the visual metaphor of providere. He describes the progress of the mature intellect that has developed the ability to distinguish what is good and what is bad, just like the eyes do. That ability, virtus, is called prudentia. And Marcus here stresses the etymological connection with providere, yet again, Legibus 1.60. In this case, prudentia is defined as a quality that might inform choices for the future, but is not mainly preoccupied with the prediction of the future. Its brief is about making sharp, deeply thought-out choices on the problems that one is presented with here and now. Far from being a virtue that is displayed in exceptional cases when a crisis is unfolding, a city is being founded, or a conspiracy is about to be foiled, it is a virtue that must be deployed on a regular basis if one is to make his way through life in an orderly and thoughtful way. Other passages of the dialogue engage with the problem of providere. That is hardly surprising, I suppose, in a work that is preoccupied with setting the laws of an ideal republic. A passage in Book 2 draws attention to another important area of contact between foresight and religion. When the duties of the priests in the state are set out, special emphasis is placed on the duty of foreseeing the wrath of the gods, divorumque iras providento, sisque apparento, so that appropriate ritual action can be taken. Even those who are in charge of public cults, therefore, must make good use of their foresight. They must make reasonable predictions on what sort of ritual action the res publica requires. Unsurprisingly, the problem of providere and its discontents takes further resonance in the De Divinatione. The language that Cicero uses, however, hardly makes reference to the vocabulary of providere, especially in Book 1, where the case in favor of divination is articulated by the character of Quintus Cicero, Cicero's brother. One instance, though, is especially significant because it brings the focus on the logic of prodigies and on the implications of the familiar process of reporting and expiation that is so central, of course, to the workings of Roman public religion. In Quintus' assessment, prodigies do not reveal the causes of events, but are announcements of what will happen nisi provideris, unless appropriate action is taken. Again, the action of providere is to be carried out in response to specific signs. The correct reading can avert dreadful events. In other contexts, the verb can be associated to the sphere of prediction. We see that in Book 2, 2.63. But the most valuable reference is towards the end of Book 1, again, when Quintus draws a distinction between diviners and those who make non-divinatory predictions based on a rational assessment of the evidence that only few are able to carry out. Whether in political or economic matters, the examples of Solon and Thales are singled out. Those men can be regarded as prudentes, id est providentes. 1.111. The proximity between the two terms and their etymological connection with the verb are still stressed. A third level of the meaning of providere is drawn out in the final part of the book. The gods are running the universe with their providentia, a notion that, of course, is drawn from the concept of Stoic providence, and broadly speaking, Quintus accepts the Stoic case for divination, and indeed upholds it at some length in the first book of the De Divinatione. The same notion of divine providence, of course, features in the De Natura Deorum, where the problem is defined in explicit terms in the second book, and where Balbus claims that the notion of pronoia can be indifferently translated as prudentia or providentia. The second book, where the Stoic theology is very much at the center of the discussion, includes extensive references to the notion of a divine providence that rules the world. The line of argument is explicitly taken up and further developed by Quintus in the first book,